Hey guys, so we're looking at the TinyGroove CS editor. We're focused on map 2. Map 3 is down there in the bottom right hand corner. Already started building it, and there's some other components in the top right hand corner that may come in a feature release of the game as well, related to kind of like an achievement castle kind of thing at Nuru's ship crash site map 2, and the fun things that are happening here. So you can see there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. The map's got gizmos, it's got loads of decorations representing the central crash site here on the map. We've also got several individual locations that are playing a key factor in the design of this particular map. You can see loads of locations that are highlighted here. So from our view or perspective, you can see that the crystals that are shown here in the middle at the base of the map, we've got units that are mostly blocking to make sure that Secret doesn't stop on that space. Basically just put a bunch of soldiers there and said, hey, don't stand on these spots, and soldiers don't move. And that's been kind of nice, mostly because it also distracts other units if for some reason Greenfinger's RB decides to go there and attack them first. So there's lots of units. These controlling the bridges over here, for example, sets them down to switch those bridges on or off. There's trigger for the crash site. Acid rain is basically what falls. You'll see there's only one of them. The others just kind of move it around to different places. And you can incorporate a variety of different things. There are dozens and dozens of triggers all over this map in different places that control what each of these things are, where they are, and how they function. Each of the crystals has one. Each of the ranges for the crystals also has one. And so you'll kind of see that the options that are available for this, again, I'll kind of scan through that one more time. You'll see that there's a maximum crystal coverage range that's shown here in red, and then you've got location for crystal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, kind of all the way around the map. But then there's also ranges for each of those crystals as they overlap, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then it feeds that to a Boolean logic algorithm that overlaps those crystals and says, hey, which areas does the enemy control and have a crystal still, producing an aura over that space, and then allows it to determine whether or not our wagon can open if it intersects with the combination of the overall crystal coverage field and the individual aura fields of each separate crystal. That way, any of the 8 factorial combinations of all or none of crystals, or any combination thereof of whichever ones there happen to be that the enemy controls, will still be accurately represented without programming thousands of triggers. So we want to make sure that all of these things are features that are represented on the map. Also, you'll notice there's a lot of seemingly superfluous locations, and that's mostly because of the fact that we want to have arrows appear in the heads-up display. Normally, you don't have to program individual spots for a lot of things, so that's kind of wasteful, but you get over 130 locations on the map, and I had no shortage of them with the Boolean logic that I incorporated for the crystals and the randomization functions I use, but just by moving the existing acid rain fields. So this worked out pretty well for us. Also, you'll see here, I just kind of added this to add kind of more of a sci-fi or futuristic feel. It kind of closes in on the crosshairs at the beginning of the map. So that's how it functions, is basically you've got the intro crosshairs, and then it kind of does 3, 2, and 1 to center on that site. So the intro crosshairs just like does a 3, 2, and 1 sort of thing before it centers in on that spot. And those are just 3 separate locations that pop up for a second and then vanish. In fact, you can kind of see that if we go to our event editor. Now we've looked at a lot of the individual locations. You can see all the different combinations that tell you what the bad weather is doing in the background. If we've got acid rain or debris falling. Now we've got crystals, basically saying if they're all lost, then automatically deploy the wagons afterwards. That was kind of an after-the-fact thing that I implemented. And then kind of has some conditions related to how those function. So it's kind of looking at the end. Usually the last things that I have towards the bottom of this list is something like what are the victory conditions. So that's kind of here towards the end after I change the way that these function. And the intro, all I've really done here is just set at the start of the map, no conditions required, spawn Wolfar, Errol, and Orla, and then set the AI restriction of all commanders there to basically just as related to player 4, and said, don't target the twins or Wolfar, play the intro cutscene, and then get the map's music to change it to encounter results, which is kind of nice because it gives us a different intro music as it's kind of laying out the breakdown of the mission. And it did this a lot in TinyGroove, and even in the co-op campaign for WarGroove Double Trouble, they did this kind of using the plan, this kind of breaking down, Wolfar saying, hey, this is how we're going to rob this place next. So it's kind of nice and gives your campaign kind of a feel, especially if you have a particularly convoluted mission that you're about to break down. And unfortunately, mine tend to be that way. And it's also saying, hey, use this intro crosshairs, bring it in with 3, and then wait a quarter of a second, turn that layer off, then go to 2, wait another quarter of a second, and then go to 1, and then wait another quarter of a second. This repeats 5 times, mostly because I wanted it to be bright white in colors. This is like virtually opaque on the map rather than something that's very subtly highlighted, mostly to grab the viewer's attention and say, hey, this is the thing you need to focus on. And then here we have a line from Nuru saying, hey, get to the city, that's where the food's going to be, wait 3,500 seconds, or milliseconds, which is basically 3.5 seconds. And then highlights the intro crosshairs to none, kind of turns them off. So that's all that happens before the map even starts. The conditions, of course, are if player 1 has no units or structures left, you lose. Also, you lose if Nuru is defeated. All the other commanders, if you recruit them, doesn't matter. If you lose them, it's just in theory they will not appear in the third map because you don't have them anymore. They died. Victory is no opponents left. But it applies mostly to any of the individual units, mostly to make sure if for some reason Greenfinger has no units left, we shouldn't have to wait for an empty user's turn. Now on the second day, we are introduced to Sigrid, and this is generally the first thing that you will see. And we ensure that, by the way, that this is coded. The conditions mostly just required it to be day 2, player 1's turn, start a turn. Then changed all the soldiers from player 2 location to crystals. So all the soldiers that are there become crystals, which is why you see some at the beginning of the map die so quickly. Mostly because those soldiers were probably attacked by Greenfinger's units and lost most of their life, and then lost life right at the beginning of that turn for Sigrid because they're crystals. So that's probably what happened there. Sigrid says, hey, protect their town called Steam Vent Station near the base of the volcano, and then spawn these crystals if for some reason they've been destroyed. We found that weird happy medium in the playthrough that I showed in the other video, where apparently we couldn't see through the fog of war, but it seems like Greenfinger's units attacked the soldier there, but did not defeat it. Did just enough damage that it then capitulated on its own when it was less than 20% life. So if the unit was completely defeated, a new full life crystal would have spawned in its place. So we displayed the dialog box here with Nuru just saying, diplomacy is probably a foregone conclusion. We're not going to be able to reason with Sigrid. For all the crystals there, we now set the damage taken to 35% of its normal 100%, which makes them harder to defeat until we fell Sigrid. And then it highlights the location for the crystal coverage to say, hey, this is where it is. Since Fog of War is on, it will only animate the auras of the crystals we can see in range of what we can view. So there's a massive part of the city, and we just want to make it evident to the player that, hey, there's a huge field here in the middle of the city, not just the ones you can see, the 2 or 3 crystals at the beginning of the game. Next, there is the highlights that are involved with this process, and then we've set a map flag to say not defeated for Sigrid, because now she's available there on the map, and this is also a trigger that allows us to follow Sigrid around the map, which is this one right here, where we follow Sigrid using the reveal Sigrid function. It says, does player 2 have exactly one of Sigrid in any location? Is the map not defeated for Sigrid true? And is it player 2's turn? Obviously, since Sigrid can't move other than turns that are her turn, it's basically going to check for this and then highlight to update her location. Please note there's a separate trigger that actually turns off the arrow after she's defeated, which is a one-time thing. Whereas this one is mostly just looking to see, is this flag for is she still alive on? If so, then change the highlight by first removing the highlight, updating its location to wherever secret happens to be on the map. Since there's only one of them, we don't have to use a meta location for it. She's unique. She's the only vampiress in town. And third, we then re-highlight that location with an arrow. In this case, it's blue to match the heads-up display. Now, on day 3, we also have these cameras that have kind of appeared here that has centered the location on the crystals and said, there's kind of a dialogue that breaks down, hey, there's crystals here. We need to let the player know what they might impact in terms of gameplay. Aside from the obvious, they're going to shield the enemy units. But it's also important that they know, hey, before you roll in, it says there towards the bottom, just a hint to the player that players that had played through this initially, and even if you've played through TinyGroove, I try to provide as much information as possible, but at a certain point, players get bored reading text, and so you try to mix it up with maybe feeding them text in a cutscene, but even that can get tiresome when really you just want to play the game and defeat stuff. And so you kind of play this weird balance between too much information and not enough. And I know some folks that have criticisms of TinyGroove mostly are disappointed by learning things by trial and error, which, as I often note, is kind of a general key factor of war. But in a game like WarGroove, this makes sense, but I figured it was not fair to tell the player or not tell them in advance that, hey, these crystals, can keep your wagons from deploying. Which normally in war you would figure out that the enemy has some secret advantage over you on the battlefield and you had to adapt to that, but naturally players playing a game would feel that's kind of unfair and that kind of affects adversely your experience of the game. So you want to let the players know if there's something that's going to make them have a bad time while playing the game. Likewise, we also have this trigger that's set up to reveal Greenfinger once he's introduced, but his introduction's a little bit more conditional. This is also after that, where it says if we defeat defeat Greenfinger, we'll switch this to player 2. It just says basically when he is owned by player 3 is lost at any location. Greenfinger is the third player on this map. And we just spawn Greenfinger at the location wherever the only Greenfinger on the map is. As our tracker just broke down, basically just has Nuru say surrender. Highlight the location with the color green to essentially let us know that, hey, we completed that, and then it will eventually remove that highlight here in a second after they have some dialogue and he joins the party. Now converts all of player 3's units to player 1, any unit or structure, and then sets the highlight of the location for Greenfinger to none and updates the map flagger to say, you don't need to reveal Greenfinger anymore, he's on our side now. We don't need to track him because we can use his own vision to enhance our fog of war. And then we set the map flag to defeated Greenfinger is true. There's 2 separate flags for this, mostly because the way the heads-up display tracks this. And then we've defeated player 3. We're now going to follow a couple of different objects here. So the assimilator balloon is what we found in the middle of the mission after Nuru makes it to the crash site. The conditions for this is essentially just says allow player 1 if they have exactly 0 of balloons in the balloon assimilator zone, and if they have 0 hideouts in the assimilator zone. It's saying, hey, there's nothing of value here, let's track it, where did it go? And it's only happening on our turn because it's the only time we can move these things. So while this particular trigger seems superfluous, like why do we even bother putting it in there? Every time that the game is cycling through after every unit movement, this would be true, potentially on other players' turns as well, but we only really care about it updating on our turn. It sets the highlight of the assimilator zone to none and the assimilator's zone center to none. We've also got it moving the locations of each of them and then re-highlighting them again. That's really all that this is doing. Same thing as tracking the commanders, only we've got different types of zones for the balloon, one for the center and one for the periphery edges to the north, south, east, and west of that balloon's hideout when it expands into the hovering hideout as our mobile hideout unit in Nuru's army. Now this is a recurring one. And this, again, just checks to see now, do we have a thief at the meta location of last recruit? This is what differentiates between new thieves we've recruited from our hovering hideout to convert it back into a balloon to move it again, and helps it differentiate between other thieves that may be neighboring that structure that had previously dropped off gold. So that way the structure still functions effectively. And it says, does player 1 have at least one of thief at the location assimilator zone? And we do. So not only do we have a thief there, but it's also one we just recruited. Double check on both sides to make sure that that's true. And at the end of a unit's turn, we want to make sure the map flag for the assimilator zone is on, which this automatically turns on when Nuru visits the crash site. So it doesn't bother looking at thieves that are near other things that don't matter. It's going to convert that thief to player 2, and all we're really doing is we wanted the Felheim style balloon rather than the one for ours, because in the future missions we may be able to actually, or even in this mission, if we captured the towers in the top end of the map, we could recruit our own balloons, and they are not the same as these movable units. And as a result, I wanted them to appear differently, so we have them masked this way. Then it removes all the hideouts at the meta location for last unit used. Technically, the unit that recruits a unit is a unit that was used, whereas the last recruit is the unit that comes out of the last unit that was used. In case you weren't familiar how those meta locations work, unit used may be the last unit that moved, or if the last unit that was given any directive whatsoever, whether that was a CO that was, or a commanding officer like Nuru that was said, hey, use your groove, that's the last unit used, that counts as a use. If you're using a structure to recruit a new unit, that counts as a use. And also if you simply move a unit or attack a unit with another unit, the unit that attacks is a use of a unit. And then finally, we have some text saying, hey, this is what we did. Provide some rationale behind why a thief turns into a balloon. The thief stole the fire outside the hideout, put it inside the hideout to inflate the hideout into a hot air balloon, and that's why a hideout recruits a thief that then turns into a balloon. Yeah, not a great explanation there, but it works. I mean, if you think about it logically, since the hideout doesn't appear to have a stone roof like the barracks does, it appears to be more of a tent, which is, you know, nomadic, more mobile structure. It makes sense that that could work in theory. So, does any player have at least one hideout in the location balloon assimilator zone? If that's true, then we're going to absorb it in the assimilator zone, and that's only really for this mission where we're trying to incorporate that technology using the implements we found at the crash site to add this new technology to our arsenal. So presumably this is what Nuru must have done at some point with barracks to get mobile barracks with wagons, so now we're doing this with thieves in the hideout. With balloons, moving them around the map. So it's just kind of providing some text to explain through rationale how that works. And this only happens once, and basically this is where it plays the cutscene that explains how the balloon breaks these things down. It's a lot of text to read, but it's mostly just to let the player know before and again after the cutscene that not all the mobile balloons in the future are going to function this way, just in this particular mission, because your goal is to make the balloon a permanent part of your army rather than just one that is a one-off that you use once to defeat the enemy in this one particular encounter. It's up to you as the player whether you want this to be a permanent part of your arsenal. If you find them confusing, or generally, I mean, you know, when you're moving this structure, it's useful to be able to move the drop-off spot for other thieves you may have on the map, but this particular structure only builds 2 units, and one of them is kind of neutralized now, since every time you build a thief from a mobile hideout, it's not going to be a thief, it's going to be a way to move that hideout, which means the only thing you can really recruit there is sharpshooters, and they already have pretty long range. But as you might would expect, I'm going to provide opportunities for you to make use of that in future maps so that it's at least legitimized in terms of existence. So the last thing that this does is it absorbs in the assimilator balloon a hideout. And you got at least one hideout it's checking for within that range. And after all those conditions are met, it says remove the hideout at the location for the assimilator zone for any player. Reads something off that says, hey, your technology assimilator aborts your strike zeppelin. It's absorbed a hideout, and then says increase the counter by 1. At the end of the map, had we collected all 6, it would say, hey, congrats, you've got this. It's a permanent part of your army now. Go army. And the next thing it says at the end of all of this, associated with the balloons moving, is that I've also built in a future achievement in the map that is not currently being counted since the achievement area of this particular campaign is not open. In TinyGroove, I didn't add the achievement castle until about version 4, mostly because there's not enough missions really necessarily calling for them yet, but just know that's coming in this campaign. It's already coded in here. If you bring a balloon and it's blocked by one of the crystals, and this is really kind of difficult to pull off because you've already got to get Nehru to the central crash site, still have crystals surrounding it, which means you're still fighting over who owns the city, which puts her in a pretty precarious position to be kind of immobile while she's searching that crash site for one turn in the middle of the city. And then you've got to move a balloon to a spot where it's blocked, and basically just says the same text as before, but now you've got this achievement unlocked thing at the bottom saying you can jam all of your mobile units, not just your wagons, but also your balloons, and future crystals and future maps will do that. Then finally, the last thing associated with balloons is unpacking the balloon at the end of their turn. And it just really all this does is checks the same way as a mobile wagon in map 1 and in this map. It says there's a balloon at the meta location of last unit used on our turn at the end of any unit's turn, and it checks to see, hey, is there 0 balloons in the space of crystal coverage? If this is true, then unpack, or excuse me, don't unpack the balloon, and make sure that it's after we visited the crash site so that we could have legally obtained a balloon, because it is also possible for us to run all the way to the top right hand corner and recruit balloons from the tower over there. So now we said change all balloons from player 1 at the meta location of last unit used to a hideout, and then it says our strike zeppelin deployed into a hovering hideout. Now, if we want to pack up the barracks into a wagon, we've got a mobile unit. All we really have to do here is essentially use that unit to move through and say is there exactly 1 of wagon at the meta location of last recruit. If so, then set the turn spent for the wagon at the meta location for player 1 to false. It gives us some text just letting us know, hey, this is a thing that doesn't normally happen in WarGroove, but has happened here as part of the TinyGroove universe. The Nehru's military can move and then removes the barracks at the meta location of the last unit used. So it's using 2 meta locations for last recruit and last unit used. And at the end of the wagon's turn, we're going to block it with the crystal. Same thing we just saw with the balloon above. It says, hey, why can't our wagon unpack? And gives us some rationale as to why. The crystal is why. That one mostly just triggers text, and you'll see it only happens once. Whereas this one, unpacking at the end of the turn, converts it into a barracks, and this is a repeating function that says, does the player have exactly 1 of any wagon at the meta location last unit used, and is it not in the location of the crystal coverage? That's the only thing that's new that's added from this same trigger we reviewed in map 1, so I'm going to kind of move on. But basically, if we're not in the range of a crystal coverage area, which is constantly updating based on which crystals are still in range and their overlapping auras, using some Boolean logic with map algebra, it says our war wagon that's deployed into a battle barracks, you can reposition it. If we're in the crystal field, it won't let us move them. So now we've got to update the Sigurd's crystals and their locations. It checks for Sigurd, making sure that if Sigurd is lost at any location, it updates, and what this one does is basically makes the crystals more vulnerable as Sigurd passes away and removes from this particular map. So first it unhighlights, highlights her zone to green as this changes in the heads-up display to green for the objectives. And this also feeds the dialogue saying, hey, you beat Sigrid, but she's not going to join you, unlike Greenfinger. And then Nehru says, that'll make our job much easier in the future. Thanks, Tech Ops. And then changes the amount of damage that crystals take now that Sigrid, the one that conjured the crystals, is gone, up to 125%, which makes them super easy to... I chose 125% because full-strength sharpshooters can snipe them out really easily that way. And then finally, you've got the map and the map flag set to Sigrid is now defeated. This is just kind of a one-time thing that will also be connected to a future achievement related to how many structures have you sacked. This just connects the conditions to, is the player 2 In a situation where they have lost any structure, the structure is most likely lost due to the fact that a loaded thief is now directly adjacent to that structure. And that's all there really is to it. Since the thief is not counted as attacking the structure, you don't want to say last unit used. So in this case, so we're looking for the last unit used in the context that it's a loaded thief that's next to it. It's only recording the movement action, not necessarily the attack action, since it's not technically dealing damage to the structure, although it brings it down to 0. So based on that, just keep that in mind. It's not going to capture it when you see something in the meta locations related to last attacking unit. The display dialog box for newer pops up and says we looted rations and increases a counter that is currently attached to nothing, but once we've got the campaign achievements connected to this, it will give you a campaign achievement for X number of looted structures. And it's only focused on Felheim's structures because they're the quote-unquote the man, which is technically a woman's secret they were taking the money from. Robbed from the rich to give to the poor. They wouldn't share our rations with us when we were nearly dead and dying on their doorstep, and so as a result we have looted it to sustain our army. Now this is a massive sequence of things, so I'm going to kind of back up here because there are a massive number of triggers related to which crystals are operating and which ones are not, and it's a bunch of yeses and nos and combinations for each, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all those, but basically 1 through 8 are featured here, and essentially breaks down a couple of things. 1, all of the crystals are healing each turn, which is what keeps them around and makes it worth programming something like this. You basically add 20% of their life at the beginning of player 2's turn. Naturally, the first thing that happens is they lose 20% of their life, so this heals them back. Any crystals that are less than 20% life automatically die, because that happens first before it processes any of these triggers as part of the game's engine. You could put that on the turn before, but then it makes it impossible for the units to get up above 100% life without artificially raising or causing these crystals to heal per turn. They don't really want that. So you've got a massive number of triggers doing this. Crystal triggered, I'm just going to kind of break this through. We're looking at crystals 4 and 6 on the location map, which you don't really necessarily need to know where they are, but since the crystals are oriented kind of in an octagon, Crystal 4 and 6, it's kind of looking at Crystal 5 in between them and saying, well, are there crystals to the left and the right of this trigger? So it's basically got a combination for each one of those that is included here, and then uses some map logic to update that, saying, does player 2 have exactly 0 crystals at Crystal 5? Does it have any at 6 or 4 on either side of it? And then is the current turn at least day 2, meaning are there any crystals in the map yet? Because if I don't put that in there, then all of these are true at the beginning, and since these only will function, I guess, early on, I don't want it to do stuff that adds a bunch of random highlighted stuff on the map that the player will have to see and deal with and won't understand. So for context, we've also got it set up to confirm that make sure we're not constantly trying to check for these triggers if the conditions that matter for them are happening. So this just improves the efficiency of the game by not having to check dozens of triggers that are irrelevant after we've destroyed all the crystals. Which, if you've ever played a campaign that's got like hundreds of triggers in them, the game runs slow after a while if there are a lot of triggers that it's checking for and then confirming, yep, nope, don't need to do anything with this trigger. So cleaning this up a little bit will actually improve the speed by which the AI will play through the campaign a little bit, because those triggers will also happen on their turn, depending on how you program these repeatable triggers. So you've set the highlight of the location for crystal coverage to none, and then said, hey, calculate the crystal coverage as the difference between crystal coverage and crystal range 5. And the conditions for this are different, mostly because we're saying that, well, if there are no crystals at any of this, then we're just saying from the crystal coverage, all we need to do is difference it and say, hey, remove the space within the range of crystal 5. However, that changes because there's overlapping crystals. So for example, if we have no crystal at location 5 and there's no crystal at location 6, but there's still one left at 4, that means that the area adjacent to the crystal of crystal 4 is on the left of this crystal. Well, that's going to be problematic. We don't want to delete everything in the range of Crystal 5's aura, because this would artificially remove an area that the wagon shouldn't be able to unpack within the aura of Crystal 6. Or excuse me, Crystal 4. So, in this case, we address this by saying, hey, take the highlight, set the location of the coverage to the difference of the crystal coverage, which is the overall area covered by all crystals, which is updated several times through these sequence of events, and says cover it with the location of crystal range 5. Then we set the location using the map logic. So first we did a difference, and then we did an intersection and say, well, what overlaps between the crystal that is still functioning, number 4, and the one that was just destroyed, number 5. What happens there? In the overlapping space, we have now provided an overlap 1 separate area and called this the intersection between those two spots. And then we've updated crystal coverage to say, hey, wait a minute, let's now add the union of crystal coverage and location overlap 1 to add that area back to that overall coverage. So first, we differenced it to take it away. We then placed the overlap here. And then third, added the crystal coverage to say, hey, place the overlap back to the crystal coverage after we deleted everything that was in range of crystal 5. And that's how it works. And then finally, to clean it all up, because we didn't want to create dozens of overlap areas, we only need 2 in case there's 2 crystals that are overlapping, not like 20 overlap zones. So as a result, I set it back to a location that just has no cells highlighted anywhere on the map, and I called that location blank. I thought that was kind of an easy area that you could call, junk or blank or empty, computer science terms for empty sets. And you could use that for something you can then store an empty set of locations in. So just cleaning things up at the end of this. Now, what happens if we've got only a crystal 6, basically the same thing we just did with 4, but now with 6. Again, using 1 overlap zone, but this time checking the overlap between 5 and 6 instead of 5 and 4, and then sets it to blank at the end after we've updated it using a combination of difference, intersection, and then union. 3 separate concepts related to location overlaps, or not overlaps, as it were. And then finally, the last context is the most complex to code, because you have basically the conditions of, we don't have a crystal at location 5, but there's 1 on either side of it in 4 and 6. There's overlapping zones in each space, and so we need 2 overlapping zones. 1 to keep track of the overlap between crystal 5 and 4, a second overlap to keep track of the overlapping auras between 5 and 6. That way we only delete the area from the aura and the first difference there at the top, and then we union it twice. First crystal coverage with overlap 1, then crystal coverage with overlap 2, and then set overlaps 1 and 2 back to blank. So it seems convoluted, but basically every crystal has 4 individual fields for if it, along with 2 of each of its neighboring crystals, are gone, if 1 of those neighboring crystals is gone on either side, and then if both of those neighboring crystals are still there but it itself is gone. Those are the possible combinations of this. You can kind of think of it as individual quadrants of a matrix, fitting each of those puzzle pieces. And then finally, at the end of all of this, there's also a separate set of, after we've covered all 4 of each of the individual conditional components that update the locations. I've also added at the end of all of this by sequence, just to confirm if a crystal has been destroyed. So if we're looking at this in the context of 5, which is what we were doing a moment ago, this is also a repeatable trigger that just happens, once each cycle. For player 1 specifically, it says, does player 2 have exactly 0 of a crystal there? Is the current turn at least 2? And then says, are all the crystals destroyed? If that's not true, then do this. And breaks down the highlight for each location. And says again, make that the union of location 5 and this crystal. That's all that does, is it kind of goes back and updates the differences between those spaces, since it's possible that there are random slivers or fragments that are not incorporated correctly. If those conditions are somehow skipped for some reason, this cleans it up again at the end. And so that is the very complex method using a lot of the Boolean logic associated with individual locations to make this work for the crystal fields inhibiting the unpacking of mobile barracks and mobile balloons. Next, we have notes that only play once for each one. For example, we've been focusing on crystal 5. Here's what it says. It plays once, and player 2 has exactly 0 of crystal there, and the turn's at least day 2. Since it didn't exist on tape 1, we want to make sure that that's there as well. So it doesn't conditionally present us with 8 statements, 1 for each crystal on day 1. And the actions are basically to highlight the area to none. That makes the purple arrow go away. And the heads-up display as we destroy the crystal and says, yay, we destroyed the crystal. That's amazing. Some fun thing, but it's something slightly different that kind of adds different flavor text. This one says we destroyed a crystal. We'll take the city soon if we destroy crystal 6. So it's fun to kind of mix up the text a little bit just so you don't feel like it's reading the exact same thing. Now this next series of triggers are associated with limited stock of units. We have X number of soldiers, X number of spearmen, X number of dogs, mages, and archers to keep track of. And so now that we have all of this information, let's break down how this works. We'll focus on the archers. Now this is basically saying in this survival themed campaign, I didn't want you to be able to build infinite units, so we've got 5 archers and it's basically dropping our counter to 4. Normally it'd be useful just to have a counter for this, but since we want it to feed the player conditionally information, it's going to happen once and basically provide the background with the counter. Is it exactly 5? Does player have exactly 1 archer at the meta location of last recruit? And is there exactly 0 of archer at the location of zone out archer? Now this is a zone that moves transitionally in the actions that are provided here. So it provides us the text, and this is why you need 1 for each individual one, because there isn't a way to conditionally add a specific counter to text in a dialog box, which is why it seems like it's messy that you've got 5 of each of these for every time the player's got 5 archers left, 4 archers left, 3 archers left, 2 archers left. It's going to do this, subtract by 1. And so instead, we're just doing this once each time, rather than dealing with loops that may have things that possibly mess them up. So as a result, this last piece is moving the location of zone out archer to have the same array of tiles as meta last recruit. Well, what's happening here is there is a thing at the bottom that says reset archer. So after we have recruited an archer, we don't want it to try and count that unit again in the cycle of keeping track of where the archer's location is for the last recruit. So it's saying, hey, there's 0 archers at the location of last recruit. If we recruited another archer, it would have trouble actually keeping track of where the previous archer was and possibly artificially count your counter again. We didn't want to penalize the player for trying to build 2 of the same unit right in a row but at different production structures, so we added this feature of saying, is there at least 1 barracks at any location? And said move the unit of zone out archer to have the same array of tiles as location top right, which is just a square in the top right corner of the map, and it's over Blavo. So for some reason it tried to spawn something there. It doesn't. It's just a location that's out of the way. And it automatically rewrites that location next time you build another archer. For example, when we go from 4 archers to 3. This is the defaults on this map if you haven't played Mission 1 yet. But basically what this does is it says, does player 1 have exactly 1 of archer at the meta location? Same thing as 5, but now applies just to 4. And again, move the location, making sure that there are 0 of archers, the location of zone out archer. That location of the zone out archer stays at the location that's there until that archer moves, at which point it rezones out to the top left-hand corner, or excuse me, top right-hand corner of the map. And then Tech Ops updates you saying, hey, you've only got 3 archers remaining in the stasis pods of the ship that crashed, which is why we have limited units and not unlimited units. Our ship has crashed. And we need this to be kind of a survival theme, so you got to be careful about how you use your units and just haphazardly throw them into the fray at the front lines of battle to die. The last thing is just, again, zoning out the archer to the last recruit and updates your stock. So it does this again for 3, and then 2, and then 1. And then finally, this one's a little bit different because now you have none left in your stock, and it says, hey, is the counter 0 at most? Does player 1 have 1 of archer at the last recruit, and do they have 0 at the zone out archer? Same as before. And in this case, I set the zone out space to the top right-hand corner of the map just to confirm that, yeah, no unit can stand there, so you can't game this particular trigger. And then finally it breaks down to saying, hey, remove any unit in the meta location of last recruit for player 1. It feeds you some dialogue that says, hey, we're going to give you your money back. Here's 500 gold for the archer that you purchased but can't actually build. And then changes the turn spent for the barracks. Using the meta locations now is much easier than just saying, hey, any barracks, but then only having one barracks on the map. Since the barracks move all over the map, this is especially important for this, since TinyGroove CS was really not possible before the Double Trouble update with the DLC and the editor updates. And then refund that gold to the player. So not only do they get to use their barracks again, but they also have their gold refunded based on what the unit costs. And so that is how these individual units work. The next feature here is mostly keeping track of which hideouts as they are captured. This is a trigger that plays once, and for example, it says, does player 1 have exactly one of hideout at location hideout 6? If so, feed us a message that says, yay, we captured a hideout, increase the counter by 1. If we capture all, for example, the first one that we captured gives us our first war wagon. The third capture, when this counter reaches 3, gives us our second one. When it reaches 6, it gives us our third war wagon, which at that point the map should virtually be over. But since technically you can also move the central barracks, I mean, why would you need 4 barracks? But if you wanted to, you totally can. And in a previous playthrough, I have definitely surrounded a commander with 4 barracks, and it's fun. This is also your way of spawning war wagons. Mostly checks to see is war wagon exactly 1. Here it is, and it displays your first war wagon. It says, hey, get it near the front lines. You spawn our second war wagon. Now checking with that previous counter, which is why those are above these chronologically in the list. It says if the war wagon is exactly at 2. And war wagon has a separate counter, is looking at how many hideouts that are owned. In this case, once it hits 3, and then says does hideouts equal 6. If the counter for war wagon is exactly 3, then it's going to update this again. Now, this list right here is all of the objectives that pop up in the heads-up display, and there are a lot of them. For example, this first one is the first objective that appears on the display after the initial that's provided there in the intro, before the map even starts with turn 1. This is on day 2, and it's basically just checking to see, does Sigrid have at least 1 crystal in any location? They just spawn 8 that turn, so it's confirming at the very least that they're there, and that this is relevant mostly because it's all about the crystals and Sigrid. So it's checking to say, hey, play this sound effect, which we just kind of added a sound effect to all updates to the heads-up display, and then adds the information related to new bullet points, which are shaped like hearts because it's a Nuru's campaign, but also I chose hearts because they are in the Unitext options for shapes that are included in the keyboard on the Switch. The heart appears the biggest with the regular size text, even bigger than the circles for some reasons that I don't quite understand, but for the most part, the shaded circle appears as a dot rather than a fully filled-in circle. And there's a concentric circle option that looks like a target, which is kind of cool. I might use that later, but for now I use the hearts because the shaded heart looks like a heart still when it's shaded in. Plus it's Nuru, and she's supposed to be a female character and very fun-loving, and thought that would be something fun to track all the different mission objectives. Now, securing the inner city crash site, this basically breaks down how this works. It updates the map flag to all crystals destroyed to false, in case for some reason it was somehow true. At the beginning of the map, this shouldn't be true. And then highlights each of the locations where the crystals are on the map, 1 through 8, to be purple. And then that is, of course, fed up on the display as well. You can see the heads-up display. It's using the information for color player _ purple to be the defense crystal, so it's color-coded as well. Makes it easy for the enemy, or excuse me, for the player to see where the enemy is in terms of tracking Sigrid's location, which is the blue arrow that pops up as a new feature on the map, and it adds information in parentheses saying, hey, this is a new thing. Likewise, TAC Ops has now provided us more information here related to the hideouts. It's saying, hey, there's mobile hideouts. We need to absorb more of them. Here's the location where the 6 hideouts are. It automatically ignores hideout 1, assuming that you collected the one right next to your units they can capture on turn 2. That may be an erroneous assumption, but The game, I've figured, as I've tested this through a few times, is virtually impossible to not capture the first hideout because you have no means of recruiting units, plus you also don't get any mobile barracks at the beginning of the map if you don't capture that one early on or at the beginning of the map. Secrets units will steamroll your entire group. So it's pretty much a given that hideout 1 closest to your units in the bottom left-hand corner of the map is the first one you're going to check, so don't even bother to highlight that one. Plays the sound effect and adds this as the new thing at the bottom there in underscore yellow is the color this time for each of the yellow arrows that are highlighted on the map. And then I usually like to provide some sort of text after the, once I've got a laundry list of things that start to appear here in the set map objective options. If you have a text box that appears after that, on some platforms this objective screen will vanish after X number of seconds, like 2 or 3. But this will now keep it up on the screen until they press the button to end or remove the dialog box to move forward. And this keeps it up on the screen a little bit longer. You can always see it in the overview screen as well, but my experience playing on PC a little bit, sometimes when you open the overview screen it causes the game to crash. So I wanted this to stay up for long enough that you can at least read all of the words. And there's a lot of words now, so if you put a text box below it, it now makes that the conditional statement that makes this objective go away. So that's why I have a dialog box after these as well for a lot of them. This one is now checking for 2 conditional things related to Greenfinger's appearance on the map. The first is the objective update that says, does player 3 have at least one of Greenfinger at any location with exactly 0% groove? Since the map starts with Greenfinger already on the map and I've preconditioned him to already have a groove of at least 5%, the only way he gets to 0 is by using his groove. Since there is no trigger that says, hey, has this unit used its groove until meta locations? Just kind of programmed this by habit using this method, but meta locations for last groove used is also an option. Also, you could go through and check these and evaluate, whoa, is that where these vines are? It provides some text, sets the option for defeated Greenfinger or not defeated to true, saying, hey, he's on the map now and he's part of the directives. This is what tells the heads-up display to track whether or not this objective has been completed later in the game when it sets this to false after Greenfinger is felled and joins our army. And again, adds this as the new feature of locate the source of the vines first. Anyone who's played WarGroove knows it's Greenfinger, but in all likelihood you will not see him before you see his vines. So this now updates this to say, hey, do you see Greenfinger now? If you see him and his vines at the same time, if he's playing super aggressive, this might happen, but chronologically that's why this one comes next, and immediately updates it to say, hey, introduce Greenfinger with its cutscene, read some text afterwards, and then after that, there's also, I have a separate trigger, kind of sloppily programmed this to say, hey, is Greenfinger by player 3? Can it be seen by player 1? Then do the heads-up display to update our objective, which is mostly just visual tracking, and again, added a dialog box after that with Nuru kind of lamenting her situation. Now, this gets into a little bit of a mess. So we've got a few more of these that's saying, hey, if we captured hideouts, is the hideouts at least 3? This now updates it with the heads-up display to say, hey, we've now got new information related to these, and it gives us the update that this is why these nearby mobile wagons or war wagons are coming online. As we've learned a little bit more about why capturing hideouts somehow affects why we get new barracks, needed to provide some semi-sciencey reason as to why that was happening. And this is now that she's arrived at the crash site. This introduces our side quest, so it turns the assimilator zone on after visiting the crash site as a flag on the map, and then centers the location on the wagon spawn location. Sets the highlight of the location for Tower 1 and Tower 2. This is also introduced a new update it doesn't really talk about a whole lot because obviously you need to steamroll secrets units. So beyond removing her from the map, it's also highlighted the towers at the top right-hand side of the map, which are likely to be the last units the enemy has. So we don't highlight their hideout because it's already highlighted in yellow with the other trigger. And then we'll convert the balloon that appears there. We're going to spawn one for player 2 for Sigrid, then convert it to player 1 because we want it to look like one of Sigrid's balloons with our color, mostly because we can build our own balloons if we capture those aforementioned towers. and we want it to visually look different for the assimilator balloon so it's not easily confused with other types of balloons that are just transports. It's not likely to happen since those are probably the last structures you'll attack in the end of the game, as I did with the playthrough. But finally, you'll also see that it sets these to ground pulse with the color neutral to draw the player's attention to it, but also to give you an idea of what its zone is. These last couple are checking again, do we have 3 hideouts, and evaluating whether or not it's now showing you on the display to update this in the bottom section where it says updated in parentheses for capture 3 more hideouts to power another mobile war wagon. Next, this is checking for are all the crystals gone? If so, update the flags that track them. If they're exactly 0 crystals, then hey, we want to reward the player by saying, hey, they're all gone now, yay. TAC Ops says you don't have to worry about parking your wagons anywhere. There's no more crystal auras to get in your way, and this updates this with the flag that says, hey, stop tracking all of those crystals, overlapping zones. There aren't anymore, because the game will continue to keep tracking whether or not those conditional statements are true, and this is now turned off effectively more than 50 triggers, which is nice because there are no more crystals to track, and so this will now violate all the conditions for all of those, which means ignore these conditional statements and move on a lot more quickly. Now, you will see a massive number of these all in a row because there are a lot of different combinations, 16 of them, for whether or not they complete items 6, 7, 8, and 9 in whatever order that they want. Everything previous to this has kind of been in sequence for the most part, assuming that you've done some of these things in a certain order. So let's break down what they are. Item number 6 is revealing green finger false. What this is saying is essentially is green finger still there? Unfortunately, it's using kind of an opposite logic for both this one and for Sigrid. So false means true and true means false. So is it true that green finger's been felled, but false for has Niru reached the crash site yet? Has Niru not defeated Sigrid yet? And then finally, are there still crystals remaining? So item number 6 in the way that I've labeled these is essentially, yeah, we've beaten Gringfinger, but we have not bothered to complete item 7 on the list, which is get Niru to the crash site. Item 8, have we beaten Sigrid? And item 9, have we destroyed the crystals that are protecting the city? This can be done in any order, and so we need to represent that on the heads-up display, and that's all these series of sequences do. Is say, hey, update this by saying, yeah, we defeated Greenfinger, but we haven't completed those other tasks yet. Item number 2 is, again, just looking singularly, saying, well, what if we've only made it to the crash site, but haven't defeated Greenfinger or any of the other things? Show that as the only thing completed. And this is where the duplicate option in the bottom right-hand corner is very useful, because I just duplicated this a bunch of times and then changed the description to say, hey, we defeated Sigrid, but maybe haven't beaten all the crystals yet, as the optional side quest below. And then likewise, it says, hey, find a little bit more data related to this, related to updating whether or not the crystals have been destroyed. So that's one of each, but now what if we've completed 2 of the 4? What if it's the first 2, 6 and 7? What if it's the second 2, 3rd and 2nd? What if it's the 3rd and 4th of the 4 options? Which is pretty likely actually 3rd and 4th, mostly because defeating Sigrid and destroying the crystals pretty easy, one after the other. Greenfinger ran away from us in the playthrough that we were showing, and the other corresponding video to this one noted in the description. But for capturing more hideouts to power another mobile war wagon, this is a little bit more complex. And so it's possible that we haven't captured the requisite number. Usually those 2 are also cascading, mostly because if you defeat Greenfinger and he owns both of those 2 hideouts in the top, those happen in sequence almost immediately. So now we're looking at 6 and 7, just to give you a breakdown. This basically says, yay, did we defeat Greenfinger, using opposite logic, and is the balloon assimilator zone on for after the crash site? Has Niru visited the crash site? But again, opposite logic. I apologize for the way this is scripted because it's probably confusing. But basically it's saying, is Sigrid not dead yet? Is that true? So in this case, we are still revealing Sigrid's location. We're tracking it on the map, which means she has not been felled yet. And as a result, her information here should say, no, we have not defeated Sigrid, but yes, we have subdued Greenfinger, and yes, we have captured another wagon, which now upgrades this bottom one where it says at the bottom, capture 3 more hideouts. That would be true, because now we have 3 hideouts so far. We only need the last 3 to get our 3rd wagon. Now, what if we have more than 2? So this is testing all the combinations of 2, which there are 6 possible combinations of those, and then saying, well, what if we have 3 of them and it's 7, 8, and 9? Or what if we have 3 of them if it's 6, 8, and 9? Or what if we have 3 of them and it's 6, 7, and 9? So it's testing all the possible combinations of 3 of these with still mutually not completing exclusively the 4th option. And so of the 16 possible options that are shown here, this one is just kind of showing the last one of 3, showing 6, 7, and 8 in the logic pattern, whereas we have contended with Greenfinger and dealt with visiting the crash site and defeated Sigrid, but somehow we have more crystals remaining. It says, hey, you got more crystals to destroy. Also, by visiting the crash site, for any of those that are true, it also adds this one at the top that says eradicate Felheim's presence as the new key objective, which is always in red. Technically, the other main objectives that appear at the top are also generally necessary for completing the map. And this final one of the 15th of 16 possible triggers is this one, and I call it the final one because the 16th trigger is technically if none of these are true, which you don't really need to program a trigger for that, because if none of them are true, then the heads-up display is not going to update. So this is 15 of the 16 in that list, and it says, hey, if all these are true, and do something cool, like basically update all of them to say all 4 of those bullet points are now highlighted on this list. Next, if all 4 of those are true, we've also added a second one that says, hey, if there's exactly one of barracks, the location of the central barracks, we're treating as a switch and says, hey, turn the map flag for central barracks owned to true. When that happens, we're now checking for that map flag here of is that central barracks owned, now there at the top, followed by are items 6, 7, 8, and 9 on that list true. If so, if all those things have been completed, we're ready to introduce the outlaws now. We didn't want to overload the player with too much competition. If those bridges are down, they start to storm the city immediately, which is why I made them switch bridges connected to gizmos. And so in this case, it sets the gizmos, the location of switch bridges, to true. That'll be shown there on the map. Then plays the drawbridge lowered sound effect at each one of those. Then says TAC Ops updates the information on the dialog boxes, allowing the player to know, hey, we're probably going to have to deal with some folks storming across those bridges here in a second. You might want to prepare yourself for invasion from the east. And she says, yeah, we're going to deal with that, and it adds some comedy along the way there because it's not fun to play a doomsday scenario with no comedy. So she makes some commentary about city parking and how it's not good. And yay, at least we don't have to deal with the problems with their new central barracks in the middle of the city, which now can move because it's been updated with the option to recruit a wagon from it. So the outlaws in the intro here is now introducing them once that has happened. All it's checking for is, do we own that barracks in the center and have completed those other 4 things? If so, introduce us to Wolfar and the twins. And to do so, it introduces them through a cutscene called the Outlaw Intro up here at the top, then follows with some dialogue afterwards, and reveals both Wolfar and Errol and Aura on the map. All that does is it updates arrows tracking their locations. And then spawns some additional units for them, 6 of them specifically, some mages, more of them since Sigrid has probably destroyed some of them with her flying units that were there at the beginning of the map. And then says, now you can set the commanders to ignore their own safety. That way they don't stay way back there in the forest. We want them to come forward and attack us. Mostly so the game doesn't last several turns longer. And then each of these reveal functions, I'll just show the one for Wolfar, says, does player 1 have exactly one of Wolfar? Is the flag to reveal it? We just turned it on with their introduction. And is it player 4's turn? If so, update the location on the map, and we're going to make it black. For the arrows that are tracking both Wolfar and the twins, Errol and Orla. So you'll see it's doing the same thing here for them as well. Are they at each location? Is the flag tracking them on? And again, doing the same thing using the black arrow. That way it corresponds with the black text in the heads-up display saying, hey, now we've got the objective update telling us, is there at least 6 hideouts owned? If so, after we have captured all of them, either by defeating Errol and Orla and Wolfar, it updates this with saying, yay, that's the last war wagon we detected nearby. And it also includes some defeat text saying, yay, we defeated Wolfar, he'll join us, swaps into our team, goody. Does the same thing for Errol and Orla here. By checking, does player 4 have exactly 0 of them on the map? Is the current turn day at least 3? And then it's kind of tracking to make sure that they're accounted for. At this point, if Errol and Orla and Wolfar have both been defeated and the turn is at least 3, it says set the map flag to them joining us, and now changes all structures from player 4 and units from player 4 to player 1 and eliminates player 4 so that they no longer have a turn that we have to wait through on the map. Finally, these last couple is mostly just updating the heads-up display. It says, does player 1 have at least 1 of any structure at the location tower? If so, set the highlight to none to make the error go away. The red arrow over that tower should vanish for tower 1 and tower 2 for secrets buildings in the top right-hand corner of the map. When both of these are gone, the map is over, but technically those triggers don't really do that. The trigger checking for does secret own anything checks for that, and that's where these 3 combinations for items 10, 11, and 12 come in. After you completed those 4 items, it lowered the drawbridge, introduced us to the outlaws, and now we have some new things that could be completed in any order, 10, 11, and 12. Item 10 on this list, after checking first, did we complete this first floor? This is 6, 7, 8, and 9 is the triggers for the crystals destroyed. Item 10 on the list is, do the hideouts, do we own less than 6 of them? In this case, what the hideouts owned is checking is, did it trigger a one-time thing that said, do we capture the hideout? The enemy may have captured it back from us, but at that point we already owned it. So that way, if it's kind of a skirmish to control who owns hideouts, maybe with the outlaws in the bottom right-hand corner of the map, we still don't have to constantly fight them to control all 6 of them simultaneously. Next, that is item 10 on the list. Item 11 is checking, is the map flag for outlaws joined false? If so, then they're not on our team yet, and that objective is not complete yet. And then finally, does player 2 have at least 1 of any unit or structure? If so, we haven't defeated Secret yet, and the red objective at the top of the list, item 12, the penultimate one that will end the game, has not been collected. As a result, the actions here are basically checking for whether or not it is true that we have made our way through item 10 on the list. So if we back up there, it's essentially introducing the option to subdue the outlaw leaders, which is why we have one for no for item 10, 11, and 12. We didn't do that before because we already had one for item 6, 7, 8, and 9 when I said we didn't do one for no. Now we did one for no for each of those 3 not being true, since this is now where we've updated the heads-up display to say, after we've just done all this stuff with Errol and Orla, we're going to introduce the objective to defeat them, which is why it appears as new for subdue outlaw leaders. Now, items yes for 10, if that one is true but not true for 11 and 12, item 10 on that list again to review is, did we capture all the hideouts? It's possible to capture the hideouts without defeating Errol and Orla and Wolfar. So as a result, we're going to say on our heads-up display that we captured all the hideouts, but we still haven't defeated the outlaw leaders. Probably not likely that that happens, or that we haven't defeated Felheim by that point, but we're testing all possible contingencies so that if that does happen, the player's still greeted with an update to make them aware that, yeah, we're still tracking what you're doing, and pat you on the back to say, good job, you did that. Since, again, there's a lot of stuff happening here beyond just destroy the enemy stronghold or defeat their hero. And we want that to be known to the player that their progress is being tracked. While keep in mind, the actions on this list is just play a sound effect and show them something on the screen. This isn't actually doing anything that is modifying the game. It's just a thing that appears almost like a splash screen to say, hey, this is where you're at now. You can treat it as a series of heart logos saying you've accomplished things if you want. And so finally now we're looking at 2 of a thing at once. Notice we skipped over number 12, mostly because if that one is true, it's down here. We've added it in sequence. But if it turns out that that one's true at all, we still wanted this one to appear first in sequence. They completed 11 and 12 first. Mostly because, 10 and 11 first. So now we've checked and confirmed. Do we have 6 hideouts, and are the outlaws joined? Those are probably true, most likely in sequence. So as a result, we've presented them that way out of order. And then finally, is it true that we've just defeated Sigrid and haven't actually captured all the hideouts or dealt specifically with the outlaws? And then finally, what if it's true that we've completed 2 of the 3? Then we want the final objective to show that, yeah, we didn't quite capture all the hideouts, but we did the other things, and it plays the cutscene mission complete anytime that the option at the bottom is true. And it also usually includes some sort of dialogue box, followed by playing another cutscene that says end. The mission complete cutscene is actually one that most players will not even actually see. And since it's kind of the last things on this list, if you complete all the objectives, I'll show you what that cutscene looks like. And it's a way that I kind of game it to, basically it doesn't actually show a cutscene. It just says Nuru happens to have a shout that says mission complete. I thought that was fun and wanted it to say that when you've won the mission. So as a result, I kind of put this at the bottom. It says play a cutscene that's not actually a cutscene. All it has is 2 triggers in that cutscene. So we'll open the cutscene editor and show you what that looks like, followed by play the cutscene at the end, and then award victory to player 1. And then sets the map flag to victory queue to true. And we've added this just in case for some reason. You'll notice it's one of the conditions. It wants to make sure, have we not already achieved victory? Don't play this like 1,000 times over to show a bunch of these right in a row, since it only needs to show you that you have won once. Followed by victory, which basically just tells you a little bit more information. So in the cutscene editor, there are a lot of cutscenes in here, 7 of them in total. The one we wanted to show you is the mission complete, and if you look at the timeline, there's 2 things. Add Nuru to the map, because she's got to be there in order to be the one that shouts, mission complete. And that is all that's really necessary for this to work. This happens so quickly that you actually just hear the sound and almost don't even notice the rectangle try to open on the screen when this happens in the playthrough. And so basically if the player has their sound on, they're greeted with Nuru's voice that says mission complete. And that's really all that does. The rest of this are weather effects, which I almost forgot I had to go over. Man, this is complicated. At the start of the match, it employs a random number generator. There's no conditions, but before even day 1 happens, it sets a random number counter between 1 and 3 inclusive. So there are 3 possible combinations for weather that are entering this map. We have a separate trigger that actually checks for that. I'm going to skip over that and actually look at one that says, is it turn day 1? Is it player 1's turn? Is it the start of the turn? And is it connected to item configuration 1, 2, or 3? This is scheme for item 1, and essentially it's just checking for if we're in weather schema 1. It says the current weather always severe in 2 days. You might wonder, why did we set that as the action? So volcanic ash is going to fall in 3 days. And so starting on day 1, day 2, there's several things happening, and again it's saying set the weather in 2 days. So we're looking at, is the day currently 2? Is it player 1's turn? Is it the start of player 1's turn? And set the current weather to always windy in 2 days. This will make it windy on day 4, since this is day 2 in our conditions. And the reason why we're setting the weather 2 days in advance is because the spinner that tracks in the visual display of the heads-up display that shows you what tomorrow's weather is going to be like, if we set the weather for today or tomorrow, that spinner just spins randomly until it finds a configuration that matches something that's true for yesterday, today, and tomorrow's weather. And that can be kind of distracting. And so as a result, I didn't want the player to be aware that we're manipulating the weather, so it's a little bit more complex, but said, hey, is the turn day 3? Set the weather to always severe, which means on day 5 it's going to be raining ash, but also we have a second trigger here that says, is the bad weather, set it to true. Why? Because it's day 3, and day 3 is raining volcanic ash. So we need to note that. So likewise, now day 4, you kind of get the idea. It's going through here and it says move location now. So I'm just kind of showing you a few days in sequence to let you know how this works. It says set the current weather to always sunny in 2 days. So on day 7, or excuse me, day 6, for example, since we're on day 4, it's going to be sunny on day 6. And also, during this day, we are moving the location -1 and -1 to the right and down, which is why you saw everything kind of sequestered to the top left when reviewing this in the playthrough. Day 5, again, set the weather to always severe, and of course, because it's day 5, we've got ash raining from the sky, and set map weather to be bad. And when that bad weather flag comes up, you kind of get the idea. I've started to abbreviate as I've gone through here to track what the bad weather is for each of the days, and it does this all the way to day 35, where eventually it says, hey, TAC Ops updates, and it's like, success, the volcano has stopped erupting. Usually volcanoes don't actively erupt for, more than an entire month, and, throughout history, it seems reasonable that we wouldn't be still alive after 35 days of sucking in volcanic ash, even if we're not being hit by debris or being burned by acid rain. Why would we still be fighting over food that probably has now perished in the city near this volcano, which is kind of reminiscent of Vesuvius, affecting Pompeii and Herculaneum in Italy. So, based on the effects that are happening in this campaign, there's a lot of stuff happening, and to make matters worse, on days where there's volcanic ash falling 2 days in a row, we know things about weather, so acid rain is usually happening on day 2. So whenever you see volcanic symbols that are showing up there for 2 days in a row, bad weather 1, or bad weather today, is just checking for, did we set the bad weather flag? If so, is our player's turn, and is it the start of the turn? TAC Ops gives this long description saying, hey, at the end of the turn, you're going to take 30% damage, not just of our turn, but you'll notice the conditions apply to player 1, but this is mostly the description. And it sets the highlight to something that's very bright for acid rain wherever it happens to move to, based on the previous triggers, and then checks what are acid rain, or the bad weather's effect for the debris. Is it true? Is it our turn? Is it the end of the turn? And notice the trigger for this is affecting each player, so it's not just us. Sigurd's units are getting hit, Greenfinger's units, the Outlaws are getting hit. And this is actually partly why the MASH is actually a little bit easier to defeat, is because the enemy can't conscientiously avoid these highlighted areas. So in the actions, we've modified the health to subtract 30% for all units and structures at the location Acid Rain 1. For current player, you can set the damage taken to 130%. Notice there's only an option here to set the damage to something. In the black text there, I can't augment the damage by 30%. So as a result, I am having to set it to 130%, which is a massive departure when you see something like where you've already manipulated the damage to be less, like Sigurd's crystals were set while she's alive to only take, I think 30% damage. While she's still on the map, but any crystals that get hit by acid rain suddenly skyrocket from 30% to taking 130% damage. And so you can use that information to your advantage. And if you're wondering while you're playing the mission, why is this crystal so much easier to beat than another one? You got hit with the acid rain, or by debris. So as I mentioned, there's 2 weather effects. Weather 2 is tracking acid rain, and in fact you'll see that there's a separate flag called Bad Weather 2, and it describes something different. It says the thick clouds, volcanic ash in the sky are causing acid rain. It does about half the damage. Instead, it does 15% life and 15%. This is nice because you already had ash falling the day before, and now it's happening again. Already your units have restricted range for long-range units, and visibility is restricted, and on top of that, you're getting damaged 2 days in a row. That stinks. And so as a result, you're getting acid rain, which is a little bit more kind the second day. It also has an entirely separate location field than Group 1, which for the player will just feel even more random. The bad weather effects, as a result, you'll see only deal 15% damage directly, and 15% direct, 115% as it's set to for permanency for each of those units. I could have gotten more creative with this, and you can use it as like a poison mechanic in your own campaigns if you want to change this to stuff like, after 3 days, you can add a counter to this. associated with this particular day if it's connected to weather, or a counter to attached to a type of unit if it's been poisoned by another unit, to make it go away after 3 days, or have attrition where it was maybe dealing 30% on the first day and 15% on the second day and completely healed by day 3. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with this. I kept it simple, and you're probably laughing saying this is simple, but for the most part, there's tons of stuff you can do with this. This is just how I applied it because it's a weather effect for my campaign, as crowdsourced by your ideas. So this is the last thing I'm going to cover, and again, just basically unhighlights the region after it's done for weather effect 1 or 2. I called both of them acid rain, but at the end of player 4's turn, we want the weather to go away. So this just unhighlights the field and turns the flag for bad weather to off. Thank you for watching. That is everything happening underneath the hood of Mission 2 of TinyGroove CS. Thanks for watching.